Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Manhattan. Caldwell Enterprises headquarters. The ballroom was deathly silent. 400 pairs of eyes fixed on the impossible scene. Ethan Caldwell, New York's most feared CEO, with his lips pressed against those of his new secretary, Isabella Martinez, could still taste espresso and masculine arrogance when he finally pulled away, leaving his large, warm hands on her waist. The gray blazer she had carefully chosen for her first day at Caldwell Enterprises now seemed inadequate for being the center of an epic corporate scandal. "My fiancée," Ethan announced to the stunned crowd, his voice echoing through the company's main hall as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Isabella blinked once, twice. Was she still dreaming? 3 hours ago, she was organizing his schedule. Now, apparently, she was his future wife. "Excuse me." "What?" she whispered, trying to process what had just happened. "Smile," Ethan murmured in her ear, his warm breath sending a shiver down her spine. "You just saved me from marrying Caroline Wentworth." Ah, Caroline Wentworth, the platinum-haired socialite standing 3 feet away with an expression that could kill a man. Isabella had seen photos of her in gossip magazines. Always impeccable, always perfect, always absolutely terrible to staff. Ethan Caldwell. Edward Caldwell's deep voice cut through the air like a blade. The family patriarch pushed through the crowd, his $3,000 suit unable to hide the fury in his steel-blue eyes. "What the devil do you think you're doing?" "I'm getting engaged, father, just like you wanted." "Not with her." Edward pointed at Isabella as if she were a particularly offensive insect. "With Caroline, we had an agreement." Isabella felt blood rush to her face. "Not with her." As if she were some kind of trash Ethan had found on the street. She wasn't a Wentworth, true, but she had graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Business School and had worked at 3 of New York's biggest consulting firms before accepting this job for reasons that now seemed questionable. "The agreement was for me to get married," Ethan said, his voice dangerously calm. Isabella had known him for only a month, but had learned to recognize that tone. It was the same one he used before firing someone or destroying a competitor. "You didn't specify to whom." Caroline finally found her voice, which came out as a high-pitched screech. "This is ridiculous. I won't tolerate being humiliated by a." She looked Isabella up and down. Employee." Executive secretary, Isabella corrected automatically, then wondered why she was defending a job she had apparently just lost. "Whatever." Caroline tossed her platinum hair. "Edward, you can't allow this, Ethan." Edward Caldwell approached, his voice low and threatening. "You have 5 seconds to undo this farce before I." "Before you, what?" Ethan interrupted, pulling Isabella closer. "Disinherit me? Great. Isabella and I will start our own company, won't we, darling?" Isabella opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her own company with Ethan Caldwell, the man who had yelled at her yesterday because she had put skim milk instead of whole milk in his coffee. She began. She's too shocked with emotion to speak. Ethan interrupted her, kissing her forehead in a way that seemed almost tender. If she didn't know he was a heartless corporate psychopath, she might even believe it was real. The crowd was murmuring now, phones appearing to capture every second of the drama. Isabella could see the headlines forming. "Billionaire rejects socialite for secretary," or "The Caldwell scandal that shook Wall Street." "This isn't over," Edward hissed. "You have 1 week to undo this farce, or I'll cut all your trust funds, and you'll be out of the company." "Perfect." Ethan smiled, but it was a shark smile. 1 week is all we need to plan the wedding." Isabella choked. Wedding? Had she agreed to a wedding? Edward Caldwell stormed out, Caroline following him like an indignant poodle. The crowd slowly dispersed, still whispering and glancing in their direction. When they were finally alone in the ballroom, Isabella turned to Ethan with blazing eyes. "Are you completely insane?" she exploded. "You can't just kiss me and announce we're engaged without asking me first. I don't even like you." Ethan blinked, genuinely surprised. "You don't like me?" "You yelled at me because I used blue pens instead of black ones. Blue doesn't match the company's visual identity. You made me work until 2 in the morning because you wanted me to reorganize your contacts by astrological sign. And you did an excellent job. I discovered I shouldn't do business with Geminis." Isabella stared at him. Was he serious? "Ethan, you realize you just put me at the center of a scandal that will probably ruin my career, right?" For a moment, Something like guilt passed through his eyes. But it was so quick she almost missed it. "Isabella," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "I know it was hasty." "Hasty? You think it was hasty? But I'll make it up to you. Anything you want? Money. A new position at any company of your choice. A house." "I don't want your things," Isabella interrupted. "I want my life back. The life where I'm not a tabloid headline." Ethan ran his hand through his dark hair, messing it up. Suddenly, he no longer looked like the ruthless CEO. He looked like a 32-year-old man who had just made an impulsive choice and was beginning to realize the consequences. "Isabella, I need your help," he finally admitted. "If I marry Caroline, my life is over. She already has plans to turn Caldwell Enterprises into a cosmetics company. She wants to fire half the employees and move production overseas." Isabella crossed her arms. "And what does that have to do with me? 1 week. Give me 1 week to convince my father that we're a real couple. After that, we can discover that we're incompatible and end the engagement amicably. And what do I get out of this?" Ethan smiled, and this time it was his genuine smile, the one she had seen only a few times when he thought no one was looking. $500,000 and a recommendation letter that will guarantee you any job you want. Isabella felt her heart race. $500,000. She could pay off her student loans, help her mother with the mortgage, maybe even start the business she had always dreamed of. 1 week, she said slowly. 1 week. Ground rules. No kissing without prior warning. Agreed. Nothing to make me look stupid in front of people. I would never do that. And when this is over, you never speak to me again. Ethan hesitated for a moment, something strange crossing his face. "If that's what you want," Isabella extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Caldwell." He shook her hand, his long fingers wrapping around hers for a moment longer than necessary. "We have a deal, Miss Martinez. Or should I say, future Mrs. Caldwell?" Isabella laughed despite herself. "Don't even think about it." As they walked together toward the elevators, Isabella couldn't help but think she had just made the most insane deal of her life. 1 week pretending to be Ethan Caldwell's fiancée. What could go wrong? Spoiler, absolutely everything. Ethan's penthouse, Upper East Side, 6:47 a.m. Isabella stared at the marble ceiling of what had to be the most expensive guest bedroom in Manhattan, wondering how her life had become a romantic comedy cliché in less than 24 hours. The Egyptian cotton sheets probably cost more than her monthly rent, and the view of Central Park from the floor-to-ceiling windows was so breathtaking it felt almost insulting. Her phone buzzed with the 17th text from her best friend, Lila. "Girl, page 6 has a photo of you and Ethan Caldwell. Your front page news. Call me, or I'm staging an intervention." Isabella groaned and pulled a pillow over her face. Page 6. Of course, she was probably being dissected by every gossip blogger in the city right now. A soft knock interrupted her spiral of doom. "Isabella." Ethan's voice came through the door. "I have coffee and croissants, and possibly a solution to our first problem." She wrapped herself in the silk robe he'd provided, because apparently even his guest bathrobes were luxury items, and opened the door. Ethan stood there in perfectly pressed slacks and a white button-down, looking like he'd stepped out of a men's fashion magazine. His dark hair was still slightly damp from the shower, and he smelled like expensive cologne and confidence. It was thoroughly annoying how attractive he looked at 7:00 the morning. "What's the first problem?" she asked, accepting the coffee cup. It was perfectly prepared, 1 sugar, splash of cream, exactly how she liked it, which was disturbing because she'd never told him how she took her coffee. "The media wants an engagement story. My publicist is having a breakdown. My father's lawyers are circling like vultures. And Caroline apparently gave an exclusive interview to Manhattan Elite magazine, claiming I've had a nervous breakdown." Isabella nearly choked on her coffee. "A nervous breakdown?" Her exact quote was that "I'm clearly suffering from a psychotic episode brought on by the pressures of modern masculinity and an unhealthy obsession with my secretary." Well, she's not entirely wrong about the obsession part. Isabella paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips. "I'm not obsessed with you. You reorganized my entire workspace because you didn't like how I arranged my staplers. Organization increases productivity. You bought me a specific brand of pens because you said my handwriting looked better with them. It did look better, Isabella. You once called me at midnight to ask if I thought your tie was too blue for a morning meeting." He was quiet for a moment, then set his coffee down with a slightly sheepish expression. "Okay, I may be detail-oriented when it comes to my work environment. Is that what we're calling it?" Before he could respond, his phone rang, he glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. "Edward Caldwell," he answered with cold professionalism. "Yes, Father, I saw the articles. No, I'm not having a breakdown. She's right here. Would you like to speak to her?" Isabella's eyes widened, and she frantically shook her head. Ethan smirked and put the phone on speaker. "Isabella, darling," he said loudly. "My father would like to meet with us this morning at the company with the board of directors." Isabella stared at him in horror. The board of directors. She wasn't prepared for this. She hadn't even agreed to meet his father, let alone perform for the most powerful business executives in New York. "Tell him we'll be there in an hour," Ethan continued, watching her face with obvious amusement. "I can hear you, Ethan." Edward Caldwell's voice crackled through the phone. "Miss Martinez, I hope you understand the gravity of this situation. My son's impulsive behavior has put our company's reputation at risk." Isabella found her voice, partly from indignation. "With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, your son is a grown man capable of making his own decisions about his personal life." Dead silence on the other end of the line. Ethan's eyebrows shot up, and he looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "I see," Edward finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Well then, Miss Martinez, I look forward to our meeting. I'm sure you'll have many interesting perspectives to share." The line went dead. "Did I just make it worse?" Isabella asked. "You just told Edward Caldwell that his opinion doesn't matter," Ethan said, and he was definitely smiling now. "In 30 years, I don't think anyone has ever done that." "Great. So now he really hates me." "Oh, he hated you the moment I kissed you. But now he respects you, which is infinitely more dangerous." Isabella sat down heavily on the pristine white sofa. "Ethan, I can't do this. I don't know how to be engaged to someone. I don't know how to convince your father we're in love. I barely know how to convince myself I don't want to strangle you most of the time." Ethan sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Isabella, look at me." She turned to face him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "You graduated top of your class from Harvard. You've managed hostile takeovers and negotiated million-dollar deals. You once talked a CEO out of firing 300 employees by presenting a restructuring plan you created overnight. You can handle my father. How do you know about the restructuring plan?" "I read your entire employment file. That's actually really creepy. I prefer thorough. The point is, you're brilliant. You're tougher than you think." And he paused, something shifting in his expression. "You're probably the only woman I've ever met who isn't intimidated by me." Isabella felt something flutter in her chest, which was ridiculous because this was all fake. This was a business arrangement. Ethan Caldwell was paying her to pretend to love him for 1 week, and then she'd never see him again. So why did his compliment make her feel warm all over? "What's our story?" she asked, forcing herself to focus. "How did we fall in love? When did you propose? Why haven't I been wearing an engagement ring?" Ethan's face lit up. "I'm glad you asked." He pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket. Isabella's breath caught. Even fake, the ring was stunning. A classic solitaire diamond that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the coffee table. "Ethan, I can't wear that. It probably costs more than I make in a year. 2 years, actually, but who's counting? I'm serious. What if I lose it? What if someone steals it? What if—" "Isabella." He took her left hand in both of his. "It's insured. And more importantly, we need to sell this. A fake engagement without a ring is just fake." His hands were warm and slightly calloused, which surprised her. She'd expected them to be soft, like the hands of someone who'd never done real work. But there were small scars on his knuckles, and his palms had a roughness that spoke of something other than boardroom battles. "How did you get these scars?" she asked without thinking. Ethan looked down at their joined hands, his thumb unconsciously tracing her knuckles. "I used to restore classic cars in college. Therapy, my mother called it. A way to work with my hands instead of just my brain." "Your mother?" His expression shuddered immediately. "She died when I was 22. Cancer. I'm sorry. She would have liked you," he said quietly. "She always said I needed someone who would call me on my nonsense." For a moment, the fake engagement didn't feel fake at all. It felt real and intimate and dangerous in a way that made Isabella's heart race. Then Ethan cleared his throat, and the moment passed. "So, our story. We've been secretly dating for 3 months. I proposed last weekend during a private dinner at Le Bernardin. You haven't been wearing the ring because we wanted to keep it quiet until we could tell our families. 3 months. But I've only worked for you for 1 month. We met when you were still at McKinsey. I hired you because I was already falling for you." Isabella blinked. "That's actually kind of romantic. I have my moments." She slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Ethan Caldwell probably had her ring size investigated along with her employment history. "How did you know my size?" "Lucky guess," he said. But his ears turned slightly red. "Ethan, I may have borrowed one of your rings from your jewelry box yesterday while you were sleeping. You went through my jewelry box just for sizing purposes?" "I needed the ring to fit properly for authenticity." Isabella stared at him. The man had broken into her apartment, gone through her personal belongings, and somehow made it sound reasonable. "You're incredible." "Thank you. That wasn't a compliment. I'm choosing to take it as one." Despite herself, Isabella laughed. There was something disarming about Ethan when he wasn't being the ruthless CEO. Something almost charming, which was dangerous thinking for a fake fiancé. "All right," she said. Standing up and smoothing down the silk robe, "Give me 30 minutes to shower and put on my armor." "Armor?" "My best power suit. If I'm going to face the Caldwell Industries board of directors and convince them I'm worthy of their golden boy, I need to look the part." Ethan stood as well, and suddenly they were standing very close. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Close enough to notice that he had a small scar near his left temple. "Isabella," he said softly. "Yeah. Thank you for doing this. I know it's crazy and impulsive, and probably the last thing you wanted to deal with." "It's not the last thing," she admitted. "The last thing would be having to plan an actual wedding with Caroline Wentworth." Ethan laughed. A real laugh that transformed his entire face. "Fair point, though. I have to warn you. My father's going to try to break us up. He'll probably offer you money to disappear." "How much money, Isabella?" "I'm kidding. Mostly." She headed toward the guest room, then paused. "Ethan?" "Yeah. If we're going to convince everyone we're madly in love, you're going to have to stop looking at me like I'm a quarterly profit report." "How should I look at you?" Isabella considered this, then walked back to him. She reached up and cupped his face with both hands, studying his expression. "Like this matters," she said quietly. "Like losing me would actually hurt." For a split second, something raw and vulnerable flashed in his eyes, something that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't entirely acting either. Then he stepped back, and the moment was gone. 1 week, he reminded her. 1 week, she agreed, but as Isabella headed to the shower, she couldn't shake the feeling that 1 week was either going to be nowhere near enough time or far too much. Caldwell Enterprises boardroom, 47th floor, 9:15 a.m. Isabella had faced hostile boardrooms before, but nothing had prepared her for the Caldwell Industries executive conference room. 12 of New York's most powerful business leaders sat around a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. Their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile, Edward Caldwell sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Isabella with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. To his right sat Caroline Wentworth, who had somehow managed to secure an invitation and was currently shooting daggers at Isabella with her perfectly lined eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no, "I've called this emergency meeting to address the situation that occurred yesterday at our company celebration." Ethan squeezed Isabella's hand under the table, a gesture that was supposed to be reassuring but only reminded her that 12 millionaires were about to dissect her relationship like a quarterly earnings report. "As you all know," Edward continued, "my son has announced his engagement to Miss Martinez. His secretary—" "Executive secretary," Isabella interrupted, then immediately regretted it when 12 pairs of eyes swiveled toward her. Edward smiled, but it was the smile of a shark who just smelled blood. "Of course, executive secretary. How presumptuous of me to minimize your credentials." The way he said credentials made it sound like a dirty word. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Father, Isabella graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Business School. She's worked at McKinsey, Bain, and Goldman Sachs. Her credentials are impeccable." "Oh, I'm sure they are," Caroline chimed in, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But credentials don't necessarily translate to suitability for our family, do they, Edward?" Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd known this was coming, but actually sitting here while they discussed her worthiness, like she was a racehorse, up for auction, was more humiliating than she'd expected. "With all due respect," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, I didn't realize I was applying for a position in your family. Mr. Caldwell, I thought I was just marrying the man I love." The word love hung in the air like a challenge. "Love?" Edward repeated, as if tasting something unpleasant. "How quaint. Ethan, you'll forgive me if I find the timing of this great love affair somewhat convenient. Yesterday morning you were engaged to Caroline. Yesterday afternoon you were engaged to your secretary. That's quite an emotional transformation in the span of a few hours." "Actually," Ethan said, his voice dangerously calm, "Isabella and I have been seeing each other for 3 months. We kept it private out of respect for professional boundaries." 3 months? Caroline scoffed. "Isn't that interesting? Considering you and I had dinner together just last week, and you certainly didn't mention being in love with someone else." Isabella's stomach dropped. She hadn't known about a recent dinner with Caroline. That wasn't part of their story. Ethan didn't miss a beat. "Caroline, you and I have had many dinners over the years as family, friends. That doesn't mean I discussed my private relationships with you." "Private relationships." Eleanor Bradshaw, the board's oldest member, leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, you understand that as the future CEO of this company, your personal relationships are very much our business. This engagement affects our stock price, our public image, and our corporate partnerships, especially our partnership with Wentworth Industries," added Henry Liu, the CFO. "Caroline's father has invested heavily in our expansion plan." Isabella could feel the walls closing in. This wasn't just about her and Ethan anymore. This was about money and power and corporate alliances that she'd never even considered. "I think," Caroline said, standing gracefully, "that we should give Ethan some time to reconsider. Clearly, he's been under tremendous pressure lately, and people make impulsive decisions when they're stressed." "I'm not stressed," Ethan said sharply. "And I'm not reconsidering anything, Ethan." Edward's voice carried a warning. "Let's be practical. Miss Martinez is lovely, I'm sure, but she's not one of us. She doesn't understand our world, our responsibilities, our expectations." Isabella had had enough. "You're right," she said, standing up so suddenly that her chair rolled backward. "I don't understand your world. I don't understand how you can sit around a table and discuss human beings like business acquisitions. I don't understand how you can try to arrange your son's marriage like it's a corporate merger. And I definitely don't understand how you can stand there and act like my background somehow makes me unworthy of basic respect." The room was dead silent. "But here's what I do understand," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. "I understand profit margins, and market analysis, and strategic planning. I understand that your company's stock has dropped 12% in the past 6 months because your expansion into Asian markets has been a disaster. I understand that 3 of your major clients are considering jumping ship because your customer service ratings are the worst they've been in 5 years." Edward Caldwell's face was turning an interesting shade of purple. "I also understand," Isabella pressed on, "that Ethan has increased productivity in every department he's managed by an average of 32%, that his innovations in supply chain management saved this company $14 million last year, and that if you force him out, your competitors will be lining up to hire him before his resignation letter hits your desk." She turned to look at Ethan, who was staring at her with an expression of complete amazement. "So, with all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, maybe the question shouldn't be whether I'm good enough for your family. Maybe it should be whether your family is good enough for him." Isabella grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Ethan, I'll be in your office when you're finished here." She walked out with her head held high, leaving behind a room full of stunned executives and one very smug-looking fake fiancé. Ethan's office. 20 minutes later, Isabella was pacing behind Ethan's desk when he finally appeared, closing the door carefully behind him. "That," he said, "was either the most brilliant thing I've ever witnessed or the most suicidal." "Probably both," Isabella admitted. Sinking into his leather chair, "I just told off your father and the entire board of directors. I'm pretty sure I just ended both our careers." "Actually," Ethan said, moving to stand in front of his desk, "you just did something no one has done in 20 years. "What's that?" "You made my father speechless." Isabella looked up at him. "Is that good or bad?" "With Edward Caldwell, it's definitely good. He respects people who fight back, even if he'd never admit it." Ethan perched on the edge of his desk, close enough that Isabella could smell his cologne. "Where did all that come from?" "The stock prices, the client retention rates, the productivity statistics." Isabella shrugged. "I read everything. Industry reports, internal memos, financial statements. If I'm going to pretend to be your fiancé, I need to understand your business well enough to defend it. You researched my company for a fake engagement. I research everything, Ethan. It's what I do. He was quiet for a moment, studying her face. You know, when I first hired you, I thought you were just exceptionally organized. And now I think you might be smarter than I am. Isabella felt that dangerous flutter in her chest again. Don't sound so surprised. I did go to Harvard. So did I. That doesn't mean I could walk into a hostile boardroom and systematically dismantle every argument against me, using nothing but memorized statistics and righteous indignation. You forgot devastating good looks and impeccable fashion sense. Ethan laughed. Right. How could I forget those crucial business assets? Isabella stood up, suddenly needing some distance. Being this close to Ethan when he was being charming and complimentary was dangerous for someone who was supposed to be pretending to love him. So, what happens now, she asked. Did I just make things better or worse? Honestly, I have no idea. But Caroline looked like she wanted to murder you, and my father looked impressed, which is more than he's looked at me in years. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and groaned. What? Ethan asked. Page 6 wants an exclusive interview. Manhattan Elite is offering me $50,000 for my story. And someone from the Real Housewives of New York wants to know if I'm interested in joining the cast. Ethan stared at her. The Real Housewives want you? Apparently, I'm now famous for being your mystery fiancé. There are already memes about me on Instagram. Memes? Isabella showed him her phone. Someone had created a side-by-side photo comparison of her and Caroline, with the caption, Harvard MBA versus Trust Fund Baby, the battle for Ethan Caldwell's heart. I have 12,000 new followers since yesterday, Isabella said. People are analyzing my outfit choices and speculating about my skincare routine. Welcome to my world, Ethan said dryly. Last month, someone wrote a 1,000-word article about my coffee order. Your coffee order? Apparently, the fact that I drink it black with 1 sugar reveals deep psychological insights about my leadership style and daddy issues. Isabella laughed despite herself. Do you have daddy issues? I'm a 32-year-old man whose father still tries to control my love life. What do you think? Before Isabella could answer, Ethan's assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Caldwell, your father would like to see you in his office immediately. Ethan and Isabella exchanged glances. Round 2? Isabella asked. Round 2, Ethan confirmed. Ready to face the dragon in his lair? Isabella squared her shoulders and took Ethan's offered arm. Lead the way, fiancé. Let's go charm your father. But as they walked toward Edward Caldwell's corner office, Isabella couldn't help wondering if she was about to walk into another battle she couldn't win, or if she'd already won something she hadn't meant to fight for. The way Ethan was looking at her suggested it might be both. Edward Caldwell's corner office, 11:30 a.m. Edward Caldwell's office was a monument to corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Manhattan, while the walls displayed photos of him with presidents, prime ministers, and Fortune 500 CEOs. The mahogany desk was the size of a small aircraft carrier, and behind it sat the man himself, studying them like a general planning a siege. Isabella had expected anger. She'd prepared for threats. What she hadn't expected was the slight smile playing at the corners of Edward Caldwell's mouth as they entered. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to the leather chairs facing his desk. Ethan remained standing, moving to position himself slightly in front of Isabella in a protective gesture that seemed completely unconscious. Isabella found herself oddly touched by it, even though she knew it was probably just part of their performance. That was quite a display in the boardroom, Miss Martinez, Edward began, leaning back in his chair. Tell me, was that rehearsed? Or do you always attack people who question your motives? I don't attack people, Isabella replied evenly. I respond to them, and when someone questions my character based on my bank account instead of my qualifications, I tend to respond assertively. Assertively, Edward repeated as if savoring the word. Is that what we're calling it, father? Ethan's voice carried a warning edge. Isabella was defending herself against some pretty unfair accusations. Unfair? Edward stood and moved to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back. Ethan, your fiancé just accused me of trying to arrange your marriage like a business transaction. Aren't you? Isabella asked before Ethan could respond. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Edward turned from the window, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Isabella with an intensity that made her feel like a bug under a microscope. Miss Martinez, do you have any idea what it means to run a family business? I have some idea, yes. Do you understand the responsibility that comes with managing not just a company, but a legacy? The weight of knowing that thousands of families depend on the decisions you make every day? Isabella felt Ethan tense beside her, but she kept her focus on Edward. I understand responsibility, Mr. Caldwell. What I don't understand is how arranging your son's marriage protects that legacy. Edward smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Excellent question, Ethan. Your fiancée is smarter than the last 3 women you dated combined. The last 3 women I dated were your choices, Ethan pointed out dryly. Exactly my point. Edward moved back to his desk but remained standing. Miss Martinez, I've been trying to find Ethan a suitable wife for 10 years. Do you know why? Isabella shook her head, though she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer. Because he's terrible at it, Edward continued, absolutely hopeless. He dates models who can't spell portfolio, socialites who think quarterly reports are some kind of seasonal magazine, and career women who see him as a stepping stone to their own ambitions. I'm right here, Ethan interrupted. Yes, you are. And you're about to marry a woman who just proved she understands this business better than half my board of directors. Edward's gaze shifted to Isabella, which brings me to my real question, Miss Martinez. What do you want? I'm sorry? It's a simple question. What do you want from this engagement? Money, social status, a position in the company. Everyone wants something from the Caldwell family. The only question is whether they're honest about it. Isabella felt the weight of both men's attention on her. This was the moment of truth, and she realized that her answer would determine not just the success of their fake engagement, but possibly Ethan's relationship with his father. I want Ethan to be happy, she said finally. Edward raised an eyebrow. That's it? That's it. Not money. I have my own money. Not status. I have my own career. Not power. Isabella considered this more carefully. I want the power to protect the people I care about. Beyond that, power for its own sake has never interested me. Edward studied her for a long moment, then moved to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of what looked like very expensive whiskey. It's noon somewhere, he said, pouring 3 glasses. Miss Martinez, you're either the most honest woman I've ever met or the most sophisticated liar. I prefer to think of myself as refreshingly direct. Edward handed her a glass, then one to Ethan. To refreshing directness, he said, raising his whiskey in a toast, and to my son's continued ability to surprise me. They drank, and Isabella tried not to cough as the whiskey burned its way down her throat. It tasted like it cost more than her car. Now then, Edward settled back into his chair. Let's discuss the practical matters. If you're going to be part of this family, there are certain expectations, such as Isabella asked, public appearances, charity events, board meetings, where your presence would be beneficial. The Caldwell family has obligations to the community, and as Ethan's wife, you'll be expected to fulfill them. Isabella felt a flutter of panic. Wife. They were talking about her as if the engagement was real, as if she was actually going to marry Ethan Caldwell and become part of this corporate dynasty. I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, she said carefully. Ethan and I are still figuring out our timeline. Are you? Edward's smile was sharp. Because according to the Manhattan Business Journal, you're planning a Christmas wedding quite soon, considering it's already October. Isabella's blood turned to ice. What? Ethan pulled out his phone, his face growing pale as he scrolled. Someone leaked our wedding plans to the press, he said grimly. They're saying we've already booked the plaza for the 23rd of December. That's impossible, Isabella protested. We never said anything about Christmas or the plaza or no, Edward interrupted. But Caroline did. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Manhattan traffic, 47 floors below. Caroline? Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. She gave an interview to Manhattan Business Journal this morning. Very generous of her. Actually, she said she was so happy for you both that she wanted to help with the planning. She's already contacted several vendors on your behalf. Isabella felt like she was going to be sick. She's forcing our hand, she realized. If we don't get married by Christmas, it'll look like the engagement was fake. Very astute, Edward agreed. Caroline always was clever, vindictive, but clever. Ethan was staring at his phone screen like it had personally betrayed him. She's already told Town and Country that Isabella will be wearing her grandmother's dress. She's given quotes about how romantic it is that I'm marrying my secretary. She's even suggested menu options for the reception. I'm going to kill her, Isabella said flatly. Get in line, Ethan muttered. Edward laughed. Actually laughed. You two are more entertaining than anything that's happened in this office in years, he said. But Caroline has put you in quite a position. Either you get married in 2 months, or you admit the engagement was a publicity stunt. So, what do we do? Isabella asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. You have 3 options, Edward said, ticking them off on his fingers. First, you can call off the engagement now and deal with the media fallout. Ethan will be portrayed as unstable. You'll be painted as a gold digger who couldn't handle the pressure, and the company's stock will probably drop another 5%. What's the second option? Ethan asked. You can get married as planned and stay married for at least a year, long enough to convince everyone it was real, then divorce quietly and amicably. Isabella's heart was pounding so hard she was sure both men could hear it. And the third option? Edward's smile was positively wicked. You could actually fall in love with each other and make this whole charade real. Isabella felt heat flood her cheeks. That's not, we're not. This is a business arrangement, isn't it? Edward looked between them with obvious amusement. Ethan, in 32 years, I've never seen you look at a woman the way you've been looking at Miss Martinez for the past hour. I haven't been looking at her any particular way. You've been looking at her like she's the most fascinating thing in the room. You moved to protect her the moment we walked in. You've been unconsciously mirroring her body language, and you haven't checked your phone once since you sat down, which is practically a medical miracle. Ethan's face was turning red. And Miss Martinez, Edward continued, you've been defending Ethan like he's actually your fiancé, not your employer. You've been sitting forward every time I challenge him. You keep glancing at him for approval, even though you clearly don't need it. And you're wearing his ring like it actually means something to you. Isabella looked down at the engagement ring, which she'd been unconsciously turning on her finger. It's a very nice ring. It's a very expensive ring, Edward corrected, but that's not why you keep touching it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications that Isabella wasn't ready to examine. So, Edward said finally, what's it going to be? Call off the engagement, get married and divorced, or take a chance on something real? Before either of them could answer, Edward's assistant knocked on the door. Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. What kind of situation? Edward called. There are reporters in the lobby, sir, about 30 of them, and someone has set up a live television broadcast outside the building. Isabella's stomach dropped to her shoes. A live broadcast? Channel 7 News, sir. They're doing a special report on the secretary who stole a billionaire's heart. They're interviewing people on the street about whether they think the engagement is real. Edward looked delighted. Well, this is unexpected. It seems your little romance has captured the public imagination. Ethan stood abruptly. We need to get out of here. Isabella, do you have somewhere you can stay for a few days? Somewhere the press won't find you? Isabella tried to think. Her apartment would be swarmed by now. Her friend Lila's place was too obvious. Her mother's house in Connecticut was 3 hours away, but probably not far enough. She'll stay at the Hamptons' house, Edward announced. The Hamptons' house? Isabella repeated. The family estate, completely private, excellent security, and far enough from the city to give you both time to figure out your next move. We can't just disappear, Ethan protested. That'll make it look like we're hiding something. You are hiding something, Edward pointed out. The question is whether you want to keep hiding it or whether you want to figure out what it actually is. Isabella's phone started buzzing incessantly. My mother, she said, staring at the screen. My mother is calling. She never calls during the day unless someone's dead or dying. Answer it, Ethan said gently. Isabella swiped to accept the call. Mom, Isabella Maria Martinez. Her mother's voice was so loud that both Ethan and Edward could hear every word. What is this I'm seeing on the television? You're engaged to a billionaire, and I had to find out from Channel 7 News. Mom, I can explain. You better explain. Mrs. Garcia from next door just called to tell me my daughter is on the television, kissing some rich boy, and I told her she was crazy because my Isabella would never keep something like that from her mother. Isabella closed her eyes. Mom, it's complicated. Complicated? Love is not complicated. Either you love this boy, or you don't. Is he good to you? Does he make you happy? Does he have a job? Despite everything, Isabella found herself smiling. He has a job, Mom. Good. Because handsome doesn't pay the bills. When do I meet him? When is the wedding? Why didn't you tell me you were dating someone? I raised you better than this, Isabella. Mrs. Martinez. Edward stepped forward and gently took the phone from Isabella's hand. This is Edward Caldwell, Ethan's father. Isabella watched in horror as Edward Caldwell, corporate titan and ruthless businessman, was about to meet her mother over the phone. Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that your daughter is a remarkable young woman, and my son is very lucky to have her. There was a pause. You're the boy's father? Yes, ma'am. Is your son good to my Isabella? Edward looked at Ethan, then at Isabella, who was frantically shaking her head. Mrs. Martinez, your daughter has my son completely wrapped around her little finger. I've never seen him happier. Good. 'Cause if he hurts her, I don't care how much money he has. I will drive up there and teach him some manners. I have no doubt you would, ma'am, and I would help you. Isabella stared at Edward in amazement. He was actually charming her mother. Mrs. Martinez, would you like to meet Ethan? He's right here. Put him on. Edward handed the phone to Ethan, who looked like he was about to face a firing squad. Hello, Mrs. Martinez. You listen to me, young man. My Isabella is the smartest, kindest, most beautiful girl in the world. She deserves to be treated like a queen. You understand? Yes, Mom. Absolutely. You make her cry. I make you cry. You break her heart. I break your legs. Are we clear? Ethan looked at Isabella, who was covering her face with her hands in embarrassment. Crystal clear, Mrs. Martinez. And ma'am, you raised an amazing daughter. I promise I'll take good care of her. There was another pause. I like you, Isabella's mother announced. You sound respectful. When is the wedding? Ethan looked helplessly at Isabella. Soon, Mrs. Martinez. Very soon. Good. I need time to plan. Isabella, you bring this boy home for dinner this weekend. I want to meet him properly. Mom, no arguments. This weekend. And tell him I'm making my famous mole. If he doesn't like my mole, the engagement is off. The line went dead. The three of them stood in Edward's office, staring at the phone. Well, Edward said finally, I think that settles it. Settles what? Isabella asked weakly. You're going to Connecticut this weekend to meet your future mother-in-law. And after that performance, I'm beginning to think option 3 might be your best choice. Option 3? Ethan asked. Actually falling in love with each other, Edward reminded them, because unless I'm very much mistaken, you're already halfway there. Isabella looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Isabella. And for the first time since this whole crazy charade began, neither of them had a quick comeback. Outside, the reporters were still gathering. Upstairs, Caroline was probably planning their next humiliation. And somewhere in Connecticut, Isabella's mother was planning a dinner that could make or break their fake engagement. But standing in Edward Caldwell's office, looking into Ethan's warm brown eyes, Isabella couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, Edward Caldwell was right about option 3. The thought terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Caldwell Estate. The Hamptons. Thursday evening. The Caldwell family estate in the Hamptons was like something out of a movie. 25 acres of manicured grounds, a main house that could comfortably accommodate a small army, and enough security to protect a head of state. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of what Ethan had casually referred to as the small living room and watched the sunset over the Atlantic Ocean, trying to process how her life had become so surreal in less than a week. The small living room was roughly the size of her entire apartment, decorated in what she was learning to recognize as old-money casual furniture that looked comfortable but probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, art that belonged in museums displayed as if it were family photos, and enough fresh flowers to stock a high-end florist. You look like you're planning an escape route, Ethan said from behind her. Isabella turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, having changed from his corporate armor into dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look almost golden in the evening light. The casual clothes somehow made him look younger, more approachable, and infinitely more dangerous to her carefully constructed emotional walls. I was actually wondering if this is what normal feels like for you, she admitted. Living in a house that has its own zip code, having a staff of 20 people whose job is to make sure you never have to think about mundane things like grocery shopping or laundry. Ethan moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. You want to know a secret? He said quietly. I grew up here, and I still get lost sometimes. There are entire wings of this house I haven't been in for years. That's ridiculous. The East Wing has 14 bedrooms. 14. When I was a kid, I used to pretend they were different countries, and I was an explorer discovering new worlds. Isabella tried to picture a young Ethan wandering through empty rooms, inventing adventures to entertain himself, and felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. That sounds lonely. It was, he admitted. My mother tried to make it feel like a home, but after she died, it just became a place where my father and I happened to live in the same building. Isabella studied his profile, noting the slight tension around his eyes when he mentioned his mother. Tell me about her. Your mother? Ethan was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She was everything. My father isn't warm, spontaneous, completely uninterested in the family business. She wanted to be an artist, painted these incredible landscapes that captured light in ways that seemed impossible. My father has them stored in the attic now. Why? He says they remind him too much of her. I think they remind him too much of the life he might have had if he'd been brave enough to choose love over legacy. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Isabella felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous softening toward this man who was supposed to be nothing more than a temporary employer and fake fiancé. Is that what you think you're doing? She asked carefully. Choosing legacy over love? Ethan turned to look at her directly, and Isabella felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. I thought I was, he said, until about 5 days ago. Before Isabella could figure out how to respond to that loaded statement, Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at it and frowned. It's Lucas Wong, my head of security. This can't be good. He answered the call, and Isabella watched his expression grow increasingly grim as he listened. Are you sure? Ethan asked. How many? Another pause. No, absolutely not. We're not giving any statements until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Increase security at all the properties and make sure my father's detail is doubled. He hung up and ran a hand through his hair. What's wrong? Isabella asked. Though she wasn't sure she wanted to know, Caroline held a press conference 2 hours ago. She's claiming that you and I have been having an affair for months, that I've been embezzling company funds to buy you expensive gifts, and that the engagement is part of an elaborate scheme to defraud my father. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. That's completely insane. None of that is even remotely true. I know that. You know that. But Caroline's father is one of the most powerful men in New York, and she's very convincing when she wants to be. Lucas says there are now over 100 reporters camped outside the Manhattan office, 50 more at my apartment building. And someone leaked this address to the press. We're expecting them to arrive here within the next few hours. Isabella sank onto the nearest sofa, her legs suddenly feeling unsteady. This is a nightmare, Ethan. This is going to destroy both of us. Even if we prove the accusations are false, the damage to our reputations will be permanent. Ethan sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. Isabella, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, expecting to see panic or anger. Instead, she saw a calm determination that was somehow more reassuring than any words could have been. We're going to get through this, he said firmly. Caroline thinks she's cornered us, but she's made a crucial mistake. What mistake? She's underestimated you, and she's definitely underestimated us. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, his phone rang again. This time it was Edward. Dad? Ethan answered, putting the call on speaker. Ethan, I assume Lucas briefed you on Caroline's latest performance. He did. How bad is it? Well, the good news is that Caroline's accusations are so outrageous that several board members are questioning her motives. The bad news is that the SEC is launching an investigation into the embezzlement claims. Isabella felt sick. A Securities and Exchange Commission investigation would tear apart every aspect of Ethan's professional life and probably hers too. How long do we have before they freeze assets? Ethan asked. 48 hours, maybe 72 if our lawyers can stall. But Ethan, there's something else you need to know. Edward's voice carried a gravity that made Isabella's stomach clench with dread. Caroline's team has been digging into Isabella's background. They've contacted her previous employers, her landlord, even her college roommates. They're looking for anything they can use to support the narrative that she's a gold digger who seduced you for money. Isabella's hands began to shake. The idea of strangers prying into every aspect of her life, twisting innocent interactions into evidence of some elaborate con, was almost too much to bear. That's an invasion of privacy, she managed to say. It's politics, Edward replied grimly, and Caroline is very good at it. But here's the thing. They haven't found anything. Every person they've spoken to has had nothing but positive things to say about you, your work ethic, your integrity, your character. If anything, their investigation is backfiring. Small comfort when my entire life is being dissected by strangers, Isabella muttered. Isabella, Edward's voice gentled in a way she'd never heard before. I know this is overwhelming, but I want you to know that, regardless of what happens with this engagement situation, you have my full support, both personally and professionally. Isabella blinked in surprise. Edward Caldwell, the man who'd initially treated her like an unwelcome intruder, was offering to protect her. "Thank you," she said quietly. That means a lot. It should. I don't offer my protection lightly. But Isabella, I meant what I said earlier. I think you're exactly what my son needs. And more importantly, I think he's exactly what you need, too. Isabella glanced at Ethan, who was studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Dad," Ethan interrupted, "what's our next move? You're going to Connecticut tomorrow as planned. You're going to meet Isabella's family. You're going to act like the happy couple you're supposed to be, and you're going to let Caroline's accusations hang themselves. The more desperate her claims become, the less credible she appears. And if the SEC investigation finds irregularities?" Isabella asked. "They won't," Edward said confidently, "because there are no irregularities. Ethan may be many things, but he's not a thief. His financial records are cleaner than a surgical suite." After they hung up, Isabella and Ethan sat in silence for several minutes, watching the last rays of sunlight fade over the ocean. "Ethan," Isabella said finally, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest. Okay, is there any part of you that regrets this? Any part that wishes you'd just married Caroline and avoided all this drama?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Isabella began to think she had her answer. Then he shifted on the sofa to face her fully, his expression more serious than she'd ever seen it. "Isabella, 5 days ago, my biggest concerns were quarterly profit margins and whether my tie matched my pocket square. I had a plan for my life that involved marrying someone appropriate, producing the requisite heirs, and eventually taking over the family business. It was safe, predictable, and completely soulless." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a gesture that seemed unconscious but sent shivers up her arm. "Then I kissed you in that ballroom, and everything changed. Not just the external circumstances, but something inside me. For the first time in my adult life, I feel like I'm actually living instead of just existing." Isabella's heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. "Ethan, do I regret kissing you? No. Do I regret the chaos that followed? Absolutely not. Do I regret the fact that Caroline is trying to destroy both of us? Only because it's hurting you. And the idea of you being hurt because of something I did makes me physically ill." Isabella stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You realize this complicates everything, right?" she whispered. "Everything was already complicated. The moment I realized that somewhere between you reorganizing my filing system and arguing with my father, I started falling for you." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, not because they were unwelcome, but because they perfectly articulated what she'd been trying not to acknowledge about her own feelings. "We can't," she started. "Can't what?" "Can't fall in love. This was supposed to be business. A week of pretending. Then we go our separate ways. Clean, simple, uncomplicated." Ethan smiled. But it was a sad smile. "Isabella, when has anything about us been clean, simple, or uncomplicated?" Before she could answer, her phone rang. The display showed her mother's contact photo, a candid shot of her laughing while making tamales last Christmas. "I should take this," Isabella said, grateful for the interruption. Her emotional walls were crumbling faster than she could rebuild them, and Ethan's proximity was making it impossible to think clearly. "Mom," she answered. "Mija, thank goodness. I've been trying to call you for hours. Mrs. Garcia showed me the news on her computer. They're saying terrible things about you on the internet." Isabella closed her eyes. Of course, her mother had seen the accusations. "Mom, none of it is true. You know me better than that." "Of course, I know you better than that. You think I raised a daughter who would chase after men for money? But Mija, these people, they're saying you're a—" Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "A gold digger." "I know, Mom. We're handling it. Good. Because I already called your Tia Carmen, and she's calling her friend who works at that Spanish-language news station. We're going to tell them the real story about my Isabella." Isabella's blood pressure spiked. "Mom, no. Please don't talk to any reporters. It'll just make things worse." "Worse? How can it be worse? They're attacking my daughter's character. No one attacks my family without consequences." Isabella could practically hear her mother's protective instincts kicking into overdrive, and while she was touched by the loyalty, the last thing they needed was her family getting involved in the media circus. "Mom, listen to me very carefully. I need you to promise me that you won't talk to any reporters, no matter how nice they seem or how much they say they want to help. Can you promise me that?" There was a pause. "Isabella, are you in some kind of trouble? Real trouble?" Isabella looked at Ethan, who was watching her with concern evident in his eyes. It's complicated, Mom, but I'm safe, and I'm not alone. Ethan is taking care of me. Put him on the phone. Mom, put him on the phone. Isabella. Now. Isabella handed Ethan her phone with an apologetic look. Mrs. Martinez. Ethan's voice was gentle and respectful. Isabella could hear her mother's rapid-fire Spanish through the phone but couldn't make out the words. Ethan listened intently, occasionally responding with, "Yes, ma'am," or "I understand." Finally, her mother switched back to English. "You listen to me, young man. My Isabella is the strongest person I know, but right now, she needs someone to protect her. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am. I promise you I won't let anyone hurt her." "Good, because if you fail, you'll answer to me. And mijo, I may be small, but I am fierce when it comes to my daughter. I have no doubt about that, Mrs. Martinez. And ma'am, I need you to know that your daughter is the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She's brilliant and brave, and completely capable of taking care of herself. But you're right, she shouldn't have to face this alone." There was a long pause. Then Isabella heard her mother's voice soften. "I like you more every time we talk. You see my Isabella the way I see her. She's pretty hard to miss," Ethan said, his eyes meeting Isabella's across the sofa. After a few more minutes of conversation, Ethan handed the phone back to Isabella. "Your mother wants to talk to you, Mija." Her mother's voice was warm but firm. "I like this boy. He speaks about you the way a man should speak about the woman he loves. Mom, no arguments. You bring him home this weekend like we planned. I want to meet him properly, and I want to feed him my mole and see if he's worthy of my daughter. The reporters, let them come. I'll show them what happens when they mess with the Martinez family." Despite everything, Isabella found herself smiling. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, Mija. And Isabella, don't let these people make you doubt yourself. You are good enough for any man, billionaire or not. If he's smart enough to see that, he gets to keep you. If not, he doesn't deserve you anyway." After they hung up, Isabella sat back against the sofa cushions and closed her eyes. "Your mother is terrifying," Ethan observed, in the best possible way. "She's going to grill you like a criminal suspect this weekend. I'm looking forward to it." Isabella opened her eyes to find Ethan watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it made her chest ache. "Why?" she asked. "Because she raised you." And he hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Because I want her approval. Not for the fake engagement, but for me, for us, for whatever this is becoming." Isabella felt her carefully constructed defenses finally crumble completely. Sitting in this gorgeous house with reporters about to descend on them like vultures, facing accusations that could destroy both their careers, she realized that she was falling for Ethan Caldwell in the most inconvenient way possible. "Ethan," she said quietly, "what happens if we can't untangle the fake from the real? What happens if, when all this is over, we don't want to walk away from each other?" He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough to count the faint freckles across his nose that she'd never noticed before. "Then we don't walk away," he said simply. "We figure out how to make it work. We deal with the media. We handle Caroline. We convince everyone that this crazy thing between us is worth fighting for. And if it doesn't work, if we try for real and fail..." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we were brave enough to choose love over safety." Isabella searched his eyes, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Instead, she found only warmth and determination and something that looked remarkably like love. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely insane," he agreed. "We've known each other for 5 days. Best 5 days of my life, Isabella." He silenced her with a kiss that was nothing like the performance they'd put on in the ballroom. This kiss was soft and questioning, an invitation rather than a demand. Isabella felt herself melting into him, her hands fisting in his sweater as she kissed him back with 5 days' worth of suppressed longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Isabella," he said quietly, "I know this is fast and crazy and completely terrifying, but I need you to know that whatever happens with the investigation or the media or Caroline's schemes, my feelings for you are real. This isn't part of the act anymore." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the honesty in his voice and the tenderness of his touch. "Mine too," she admitted. "My feelings are real too." They might have sat there kissing and confessing their feelings all night, but Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Lucas Wong. "Press convoy spotted on Route 27. ETA 45 minutes. Recommend moving to secure location." "So much for our romantic evening," Ethan said dryly. Reading the message, "Where exactly is the secure location in a house this size?" Isabella asked. Ethan smiled, and this time it was pure mischief. "Ever seen a panic room that's bigger than most New York apartments?" As they gathered their things and headed for what Ethan casually referred to as the family bunker, Isabella couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of her situation. A week ago, her biggest concern had been whether Ethan Caldwell would notice if she used the wrong font in his correspondence. Now she was hiding from reporters in a luxury panic room, having just confessed her feelings for a man who was either going to be the love of her life or the spectacular end of her career. Possibly both, but as Ethan's hand found hers in the hallway, their fingers intertwining like they belonged together, Isabella realized that for the first time in her carefully planned life, she was okay with not knowing what came next. All she knew was that she wanted to find out together. Martinez family home, Bridgeport, Connecticut, Saturday evening. Isabella stood in her childhood bedroom, staring at her reflection in the same mirror where she'd practiced her valedictorian speech 12 years ago. The girl who had dreamed of conquering the business world seemed like a stranger now. That Isabella had been so certain about her path, so confident in her 5-year plan. This Isabella was about to introduce a fake fiancé to her family while wrestling with the terrifying realization that her feelings for him had become devastatingly real. The Martinez family home was a modest, 2-story colonial in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. It was the opposite of the Caldwell estate in every conceivable way: small, loud, warm, and filled with the kind of lived-in comfort that only came from 3 generations of family memories. The walls were covered with photos spanning decades. Isabella's graduation pictures next to her grandmother's wedding portrait, her cousin Miguel's military deployment photo beside her aunt's quinceañera, memories. And everywhere, the smiling faces of a family that had built their wealth in love rather than money. "Mija," her mother's voice carried up the stairs. "Your novio is here." Isabella's stomach fluttered with a mixture of anticipation and terror. Ethan had spent the morning being briefed by his legal team while she'd driven to Connecticut alone, needing the 3-hour journey to prepare herself for what felt like the most important performance of her life. Except it wasn't a performance anymore, was it? Somewhere between Caroline's accusations and confessing their feelings in the Hamptons, this had become real in a way that terrified her. She smoothed down her emerald green dress, the one her mother had bought her for her Harvard graduation, saying, "A woman needs at least one dress that makes her feel like she can conquer the world." Tonight, she needed all the conquering confidence she could get. Ethan Caldwell was standing in her family's cramped living room, looking devastatingly handsome in dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, and somehow managing to make the modest space seem elegant rather than small. He was listening intently to her father's enthusiastic explanation of the difference between various types of engine oil, nodding as if transmission fluid was the most fascinating topic in the world. Her father, Javier Martinez, was a man who had worked his way up from janitor to head of maintenance at the local hospital over 30 years. His hands bore the calluses of honest work, and his face carried the lines of someone who had spent decades laughing with his family and worrying about bills. He was also, Isabella knew, the best judge of character she'd ever met, and that's why you never, ever use conventional oil in a car with over 100,000 miles, her father was saying. The seals adjust to the thicker oil, and if you switch back, you'll have leaks everywhere. That makes perfect sense, Ethan replied, and Isabella could tell he was genuinely interested, not just being polite. I have a 1967 Mustang that I've been restoring, and the mechanic told me something similar about using the wrong grade oil in classic engines. Her father's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. A 2067 Mustang? Fastback or convertible? Fastback, 289 V8, 4-speed manual. I've been working on it for about 10 years whenever I can find the time. Dios mío. Her father breathed. Isabella. This boy has good taste. The 2067 is the holy grail of Mustang. Isabella descended the stairs, and Ethan's conversation with her father came to an abrupt halt. The way he looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen made her pulse quicken and her cheeks warm. For a moment, she forgot they had an audience. "You look incredible," Ethan said softly, moving toward her. "Thank you," she managed. Accepting the gentle kiss he pressed to her cheek, the gesture was chaste and appropriate for meeting the parents, but the way his hand lingered on her waist suggested depths of feeling that had nothing to do with their fake engagement. "Ethan," her mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Welcome to our home. I'm Maria Martinez." Isabella watched nervously as her mother studied Ethan with the sharp-eyed assessment of a woman who had raised 3 daughters and could spot a liar from 50 paces. Maria Martinez was barely 5 feet tall, but she possessed a presence that could fill a room and a protective instinct that rivaled a mother bear's. "Mrs. Martinez," Ethan said, offering a slight bow that struck exactly the right note between respectful and natural. "Thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful, and something smells absolutely incredible. Mole poblano," her mother replied. But Isabella could see the pleased smile tugging at her lips. Isabella's favorite since she was little. "I started cooking this morning. I've never had authentic mole before," Ethan admitted. "Isabella's told me so much about your cooking that I've been looking forward to this all week." It was the perfect thing to say, and completely true. Isabella had spent the drive to Connecticut telling Ethan about family dinners. Her mother's legendary mole recipe that had been passed down through 4 generations, and the way every important moment in their family was marked with food and laughter. "Well, you're about to be spoiled for any other Mexican food," her father said proudly. "My Maria makes the best mole in 3 states. Javier, stop bragging," her mother said. But she was glowing with pride. "Come, both of you. Dinner is ready, and I want to hear all about how you two fell in love." Isabella's stomach clenched. This was the moment she'd been dreading. Having to lie to her family about the most important relationship in her life, except as they gathered around the dining room table that had hosted every family celebration for the past 20 years, she realized that the story they were about to tell wasn't entirely a lie anymore. The dining room was a riot of warmth and color. Hand-painted plates from her grandmother's trips to Mexico, photographs covering every inch of wall space, and a table that groaned under the weight of her mother's feast. Besides the mole, there were fresh tortillas, Mexican rice, refried beans, and a salad that looked like a garden had exploded in the bowl. Ethan took his first bite of the mole and closed his eyes with genuine appreciation. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, "this is extraordinary. I can taste chocolate and cinnamon and something smoky, but there are flavors I can't even identify. 27 ingredients," her mother said with satisfaction. "The recipe has been in my family for over 100 years. Each generation adds something new. What did you add?" Maria glanced at her husband with a smile that still held traces of young love after 35 years of marriage. "A touch of coffee. Javier loves coffee, so I thought, why not make the mole taste like him too?" Isabella felt her heart squeeze at the casual intimacy of the gesture, the way her parents still found small ways to express their love after all these years. She caught Ethan watching her parents with something like longing and remembered what he'd told her about his own family's emotional distance. "So," her father said, settling back in his chair with the satisfied air of a man about to conduct an interrogation, "tell us how this romance started." Isabella has always been very private about her dating life. Isabella and Ethan exchanged glances. They'd rehearsed this story, but sitting here in her childhood dining room, surrounded by family photos and the ghosts of 1,000 honest conversations, the prepared lies felt impossible to speak. "Actually," Ethan said, his voice steady, "it started the day Isabella walked into my office for her job interview." Isabella blinked in surprise. "That wasn't part of their script. I had interviewed dozens of candidates for the executive secretary position," Ethan continued, "and they were all qualified, professional, exactly what I thought I wanted. Then Isabella came in, and within 5 minutes, she had reorganized my filing system, pointed out 3 inefficiencies in my scheduling process, and told me that my office coffee was terrible. It was terrible." Isabella found herself saying, "It tasted like it had been made with water from the Hudson River." Her parents laughed, and Isabella realized that Ethan was telling the truth, not their rehearsed story, but the actual truth about how they'd met. "I hired her on the spot," Ethan said, "not because she was the most qualified, but because she was the only person who had ever walked into my office and immediately made it better just by being there." "That sounds like our Isabella," her mother said fondly. "She's been organizing people since she could walk. When she was 5, she rearranged all my kitchen cabinets because she said they weren't efficient." "And they weren't," Isabella protested. "You had the plates on the top shelf where you couldn't reach them without a stepladder." "So, when did you know it was more than just professional?" her father asked, and Isabella could hear the protective edge in his voice. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "There was a day about 3 weeks after she started working for me when I was having the worst day of my career. Everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. I was stressed, angry, taking it out on everyone around me. Most people walk on eggshells when I'm in that kind of mood." Isabella remembered that day vividly. Ethan had been like a caged tiger, snapping at anyone who dared to approach him. Isabella brought me coffee, Ethan continued, but not regular coffee. She'd somehow figured out that I was having problems with a merger deal, so she brought me research on the company we were trying to acquire. She'd done it on her own time, stayed late the night before to compile everything I needed to solve the problem. And, her mother prompted, and when I thanked her, she said, "That's what partners do for each other." Ethan's eyes found Isabella's across the table. Partners, not boss and employee, not even friends. Partners, like we were in this together. Isabella's breath caught. She remembered saying that, remembered the way Ethan had looked at her, like she'd said something profound instead of simply obvious. That's when I knew, Ethan said quietly, that what I felt for Isabella was nothing like anything I'd felt before. She wasn't just making my work life better. She was making me better. The table was silent, except for the soft clink of silverware against plates. Isabella's mother had tears in her eyes, and her father was studying Ethan with the intense focus he usually reserved for diagnosing car problems. "And you, mija?" her mother asked. "When did you know?" Isabella looked at Ethan, sitting in her family's dining room, talking to her parents with the same respect and genuine interest he'd shown her from the very beginning. She thought about the way he'd defended her to his father, the way he'd held her hand during Caroline's accusations, the way he'd looked at her when he'd confessed his feelings in the Hamptons. "It was gradual," she said honestly. "Ethan has this reputation for being intimidating and demanding, and he can be both of those things. But he's also kind in ways that people don't see. He remembers that I don't like sugar in my coffee, but I do like cinnamon. He notices when I'm stressed and somehow always manages to give me the most interesting projects when I need a distraction." She paused, her voice growing softer. "But I think I really knew the day he told me about his mother. He was showing me some changes he wanted to make to the office, and he mentioned that his mother would have liked them because she always said offices should feel like homes, not museums. He got this look on his face, like he was seeing something beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. That's when I realized that underneath all that corporate armor, Ethan Caldwell is just a man who misses his mother and wants to make her proud." Ethan's hand found hers on the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt as natural as breathing. "She would have loved you," he said quietly. "My mother always said I needed someone who could see past the surface." Isabella's father cleared his throat, and Isabella realized that both her parents were watching them with expressions of dawning, understanding. "You know," her father said slowly, "when Isabella called to tell us about the engagement, I was worried. Not because of your money or your family name, but because Isabella has always been so careful with her heart. She's never brought a boy home to meet us, never talked about anyone the way she talks about you." "How does she talk about me?" Ethan asked. And Isabella could hear the vulnerability in the question. "Like you hung the moon," her mother said simply, "like you're someone worth fighting for." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. How could she, when it was true? "But," her father continued, and his voice carried the weight of paternal authority, "I need to know that you understand what you're getting when you marry our Isabella. She's not just brilliant and beautiful, she's loyal to a fault. She'll stand by you when the whole world is against you, but she'll also call you on your nonsense when you need to hear it. She'll love you with everything she has, but she'll expect the same in return." "I understand," Ethan said, his voice steady and sure. "And sir, I want you to know that I don't take her trust lightly. Isabella could have anyone she wanted. The fact that she's choosing me is a gift I don't deserve, but one I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn." Isabella's mother stood abruptly and moved around the table to hug Ethan, who looked startled but pleased by the gesture. "Welcome to the family, my Joe," she said firmly. "Any man who loves our Isabella the way you clearly do is a son to us." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes. Her mother had called Ethan mijo, my son. It was an endearment reserved for family, for people who had earned their place in the Martinez clan through love rather than law. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of laughter and storytelling. Her father regaled Ethan with embarrassing stories from Isabella's childhood. Her mother pressed seconds and thirds on him until he had to beg for mercy. And Isabella found herself falling even deeper in love with the way Ethan fit seamlessly into her family's chaotic warmth. After dinner, her parents disappeared into the kitchen to clean up, despite Isabella and Ethan's offers to help. Isabella found herself alone with Ethan on the back patio, looking out at the small garden where her mother grew tomatoes and herbs. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For telling them the truth. About how we met. About when you knew. I thought we were going to have to lie to them, and I was dreading it." Ethan turned to face her, his expression serious. "Isabella, I couldn't lie to your parents, not about something this important, and besides." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Everything I said was true. I did fall for you that first day, even if I was too stubborn to admit it. And you did make everything better just by being there. Even the coffee, especially the coffee." Isabella laughed, but the sound was shaky. The weight of the day, of the week, of everything that had happened since that kiss in the ballroom was finally catching up with her. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what are we doing? A week ago, this was all pretend. Now, I'm introducing you to my family as my fiancé, and the scary part is that it doesn't feel like pretending anymore." Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Maybe because it isn't pretending anymore," he said gently. "Maybe what started as an arrangement has become something real." "But what happens next?" Isabella asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her all day. "We still have Caroline's accusations to deal with, the SEC investigation, the media circus. What happens when we go back to New York and face all of that?" Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. "Isabella, I know this is complicated and messy and nothing like either of us planned, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, more real than anything I've ever felt before." "Ethan, let me finish," he said softly. "I love you, Isabella Martinez, not because you're convenient or appropriate, or because it solves a business problem. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am. I love you because you see me, not my bank account or my family name, just me. I love you because when I imagine my future, I can't see it without you in it." Isabella's heart stopped, restarted, then began beating so fast she felt dizzy. "You love me?" she whispered. "Completely, desperately, probably hopelessly," Ethan confirmed. "And I know it's crazy to say that after knowing you for less than a week, but Isabella, some things you just know, some people you meet, and you think, oh, there you are. I've been waiting for you my whole life." Isabella stared at him, this man who had turned her carefully ordered world upside down, and realized that she'd been waiting for him too, waiting for someone who would challenge her, support her, love her, not despite her ambition, but because of it. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I love your terrible morning hair, and your obsession with office supplies, and the way you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating. I love that you restored a car with your own hands, and that you still miss your mother, and that you were brave enough to kiss me in front of 400 people rather than marry someone you didn't love." Ethan's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "So, what do we do now?" he asked. "Now?" Isabella stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. Soft and sweet and full of promise. "Now we go back to New York and fight for this. Together, together," Ethan agreed against her lips. They might have stood there kissing on her parents' back patio forever, but the sound of the sliding door opening broke them apart. Isabella's mother appeared with a knowing smile and 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might want some caffeine before the drive back to the city," she said innocently. "Actually, Mom," Isabella said, making a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right, "we were wondering if we could stay tonight in separate rooms. Of course, I'd like Ethan to see where I grew up. Maybe meet some of the neighbors tomorrow." Her mother's smile could have powered the eastern seaboard. "Of course, mijos. Isabella, you can show Ethan your old room. I'll make up the guest room for him." As her mother disappeared back into the house, Ethan squeezed Isabella's hand. "Are you sure?" he asked. "We could drive back tonight if you're more comfortable." "Ethan," Isabella interrupted. "Tomorrow we go back to New York and deal with Caroline and the investigation and all the chaos that's waiting for us. Tonight, I want to show you the girl I used to be, the dreams I had, the family that made me who I am, and I want to see all of it," Ethan said earnestly. "Every part of you, Isabella the Harvard MBA and the little girl who reorganized her mother's kitchen cabinets." Later that night, after her parents had gone to bed and Ethan was settled in the guest room, Isabella lay in her childhood bed staring at the ceiling. Her engagement ring caught the moonlight streaming through her window, throwing tiny rainbows across the walls. In 12 hours, they would drive back to Manhattan and face whatever Caroline had planned next. There would be lawyers and reporters, and probably more accusations. There would be board meetings and investigations, and the very real possibility that both their careers could be destroyed. But Isabella discovered that for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of an uncertain future, because whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. She had Ethan. And more importantly, she had love, real, messy, complicated, absolutely terrifying love. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Thank you for today. For your family. For trusting me with your heart. For being brave enough to let this be real. Sweet dreams, Isabella. I love you." Isabella smiled and typed back, "I love you too. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow, we conquer the world." "Together," came his immediate reply. "Together," Isabella agreed and finally closed her eyes. Outside her window, the Connecticut suburb slept peacefully. Unaware that in a modest colonial house on Maple Street, two people had just decided to bet everything on love. It was either going to be the best decision they'd ever made, or the most spectacular disaster in Caldwell family history. Isabella was betting on the former. Epilogue. 1 year later, the Page 6 headline read, "Caldwell's secretary, from fake fiancé to real CEO, Isabella Caldwell." She was still getting used to the name, sat in the corner office that had once belonged to Caroline Wentworth's father, reading the article while sipping coffee that was absolutely perfect, 1 sugar, splash of cream, prepared by her husband of 6 months. The SEC investigation had cleared both her and Ethan of any wrongdoing, but not before Caroline's schemes had spectacularly backfired. Turns out, when you falsely accuse someone of embezzlement, the authorities tend to look very closely at your own financial records. Caroline was currently serving 18 months for securities fraud and conspiracy, while her father had been forced to sell Wentworth Industries to avoid bankruptcy. Caldwell Enterprises, meanwhile, had its most profitable year in company history. Funny how things worked out when you promoted people based on merit instead of social connections. "Mrs. Caldwell." Ethan appeared in her doorway, looking devastating in a navy suit and the tie she'd bought him for his birthday. "Ready for lunch? Where are we going?" Isabella asked, standing and smoothing down her emerald green dress. "Somewhere special," Ethan said mysteriously, helping her into her coat. "I promise you'll like it." 20 minutes later, they were standing in the ballroom where they'd first kissed, now decorated for the Caldwell Enterprises annual charity gala. Isabella looked around the space where their whole adventure had begun, marveling at how much had changed. "Remember what you said to me that first day?" Ethan asked, pulling her into his arms for a slow dance to music only they could hear. "Which part?" "I said a lot of things. That first day, you said that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones we make without thinking." Isabella smiled, remembering, "I also said you were completely insane." "You weren't wrong," Ethan admitted, spinning her around the empty dance floor, "but sometimes insanity is just another word for love." "Is that your professional opinion, Mr. Caldwell?" "That's my expert opinion, Mrs. Caldwell, based on extensive research and personal experience." Isabella laughed and kissed her husband, in the same spot where they'd first kissed a year ago. Some stories, she reflected, had the most unexpected beginnings, but the best ones had the most perfect endings. The end